ladies and gentlemen, we are at the end of week 2 for the college football 2019 season. This is Gridiron 360. I am Bill Manis. With me, as usual, is Mr. Dave. Good morning, Dave.
Morning, how you doing?
Good. Quite the happenings this weekend. We move away from the overreactions of week 1 and start to learn a little bit more about these teams and maybe tell us a little bit more about what we might see as we hit the end of the season, but still a long way to go.
Yeah, I definitely think we saw the beginnings of some potential trends, certainly some big games this week that told us, I think, a little bit more about these teams, so we can stop the overreaction and just get to the reaction.
There you go. Maybe a little overreaction.
Just a tad bit.
So we want to run down we're going to maybe do a little something different than we usually do. We're going to go by conference, but we're going to run through the majority of the games, certainly the games of most note, top 25 AP teams, and big games of the day. Really, there was a couple matchups that were quality on paper in terms of opponent versus opponent being maybe same level, like D1, conference games, as opposed to, a big school playing a scrub school. We did have a few of those as well. Yep. And then obviously the two big games of the day, my Clemson Tigers taking on the Texas A&M Aggies at home in Death Valley, and the nightcap, the heavyweight matchup we spoke of last week between LSU and Texas in Austin, Texas, which it was a heavyweight matchup, and we'll dive into that and a few other things today. So, Mr. Dave, why don't we start on the left coast with the Pac-12? Talk a little bit about what happened in that conference, the teams that have made, a bounce back from week 1, teams that are continuing to progress from week 1.
Yeah.
So what do you think? What game do you want to start with?
Well, let me just give an overview. I mean, here's what I took from the Pac-12 overall is I would say they're in a little bit of trouble. They don't look strong to me. We saw a few things that I liked, and, there's still opportunity there. But just to give you some rundown of what I would consider the drawbacks from the conference, we got games like Stanford, USC. Now, USC understand, and I'll let you dive into this a little deeper in a minute here. But USC at home takes on Stanford. Now, Stanford had a rough offensive game, but played good defensively against Northwestern last week. I will say they did lose their starting quarterback, but again, so did USC last week. So they were coming in and bringing in guys that were not expected to start and ended up taking a pretty good licking and putting up a lot of points against a Stanford team that, if I was going to say USC was going to win, I would have thought they would have had to grind it out a little bit more. But this was a high-flying affair, 45-20.
Mm-hmm.
So
in favor of the Trojans.
Yeah, and people were ready to write them off, especially after the injury.
And what was Stanford rank going into the game? Like 21, 23?
Yeah,
okay.
they were 25, I believe, or last week, and then after the win, they jumped up a little bit. So to me, it's indicative of knocking out a ranked team. Now, USC has jumped into the rankings, so that game we could almost take that as a wash from a conference perspective, but we got to go and look at Washington losing to Cal.
Yep.
I mean, that is a team that you just can't lose to and expect, especially when you're...
It's not Cal with Aaron Rodgers or Marshawn Lynch in the backfield, that's for certain.
Absolutely. I mean, Arizona giving up 41 points. They did win, but 41 points against Northern Arizona. Arizona State winning 19-7 against Sacramento State. I'll tell you, Utah, who is I believe now the highest ranked team, right? They're 13 because they jumped over Oregon.
Maybe.
Yeah. So they played a game. It was 21-17 against Northern Illinois, who is not a slouch outside team.
They're not Murray State.
Correct. But Utah having 2 home games in a row, while they handled BYU, it was not a drubbing of any sort. And then to play NYU at home again, I just not looking good. I mean, like I said, NIU series, sorry, Northern Illinois. So all in all, what I saw there, what I was happy to see was Oregon bounce back big time with a 77-6 win against. I think a decent. This is not a scrub opponent, but not a great opponent in Nevada. But I mean, put up 77 points. I think they did offensively what we would hope we would have seen a little bit more of against Auburn, which was going deeper with the ball. So they did all right. San Diego State. Not that I'm shocked by this, but taking Chip Kelly's UCLA Bruins to the woodshed and beating them at home. Overall, I think it just really wasn't a good showing. I mean, Hawaii beating Oregon State, not shocked there, but again, this is showing the low of your conference not playing well, the middle of the pack not playing great, and then in turn, you've got some big losses from your top tier teams. Washington State still has some chance here. They keep plugging along and putting up big numbers. So really, the hope of the conference is probably between them and Oregon, based off what I've seen.
Yeah. Well, let's. I don't want to spend too much time on all the games, but I do want to talk about a few of them. And let's start with that Stanford USC game because it was the biggest game in the conference of the day. Both quarterbacks for each team, their starters were down. P.J. Daniels, the second-year guy, big recruit. J.T. Daniels, sorry. P.J. Daniels, didn't he play for Georgia Tech or Wake or something?
I think he was a Georgia Tech quarterback.
So the Trojans are now ranked 24th in the AP poll, 2-0. They have this kid come in by the name of Keaton, I think. Keaton Slovis. And then on the other side of the ball, the quarterback KJ Costello for Stanford was out, and they had a young man by the name of Davis Mills, who's actually from Georgia. Would you say Duluth?
Duluth, yep.
Duluth, okay. So both these guys are at the helm for their teams. This kid Slovis was the money. I mean, and he took off his helmet. I thought he was 12. I mean, it was unbelievable. The other kid was really good too, the Mills kid, but it definitely seemed like he was more reserved. And the Slovis kid kind of took this. He seemed like he had this, I don't care approach. I'm just going to do my thing. He didn't seem like he had a lot of concern or worry and was very loose and was slinging all over the yard. And so apparently Slovis was he started playing football, from what I understood in the broadcast, maybe his junior year of high school, and only had a few Power 5 school offers. And they told a little story that his dad had asked him, what is your goal? And he said he wanted to play for a Power 5 school, and he only had a few offers. And he's like, we might need to look at other options. And the kid committed himself, apparently, to working hard. He's from Arizona. I heard that Kurt Warner, former Super Bowl MVP with the Rams, got hold of the kid and mentored him. And, I mean, I guess it showed because he came in and threw it across the yard all over the place, had a great game. His statistics were 28 of 33 for 377 yards, 3 TDs, no picks. I mean, for a guy that just steps on the field against the David Shaw coach Stanford team that is going to be solid, supposed to be one of the best in the conference. And they're usually defensively is their strong point at Stanford. This kid had a great day. Yep. A great day. Again, the other kid, Mills, 22 of 36, 237 yards, a TD, and a pick. Not a bad day. The other kid had a great day. And I want to say that because we're hearing a lot of stuff about the Pac-12 needs to come back into prominence. We talked about it. How are they going to get themselves back into playoff consideration? And a lot of the narrative drives towards, the Blue Bloods need to be involved to lift the conference. USC, Southern Cal is a blue blood. Okay, now
probably the bluest of the blood.
I don't want to jump to conclusions saying they're back, but this is with this kid and with the injury to Daniels, this kid is going to probably be at the helm all year. I'm not saying they're going to take the world by fire. I do think they're going to make a solid bowl game. Okay. This kid may save Clay Helton's job. We talked about it last week. I thought that the problem was Clay Helton, as the head coach, was too worried about his job instead of coaching the team. Maybe this young buck changes that mentality. But again, I don't want to say they're back, but they've got a few years ahead with a kid like this, and they have weapons, and this kid was able to get the ball to the weapons and do a great job. He pulled out a massive win, and maybe, just maybe, they'll start to bring themselves back to prominence and in turn bring the conference back to prominence.
Yeah, it was pretty interesting. I mean, what you'd expect to see with a kid getting out in the field like this, I would expect to see a bigger commitment to the run.
For sure.
And you're talking about, 27 rushing attempts in the whole game, including 6 from the quarterback. So they didn't really protect him a lot with the running game. And, I mean, his efficiency was unreal. I mean, he's going more than 10 yards an attempt. So, again, we don't want to overreact that it's one game, but it wasn't one game against a garbage opponent.
Right.
It wasn't against a garbage defense. Stanford's defense looks solid. And now do you see a kid like JT Daniels go and hop in the transfer portal?
I don't know.
There's a long way to go.
There is.
There's a long way to go.
And Daniels was on the sidelines with his crutches coaching this kid up. So I tip my hat to that. A la Jalen Hurts, when Tua took over, very supportive.
Yep.
But, just to kind of throw a few things out, I mean, you got a receiver with 62 yards for USC, another receiver that had 82 yards, another receiver with 97 yards, another receiver with 106 yards. This kid spread the ball around.
Yeah.
And when you've got skilled players on the field that can make plays, you need to get the ball in their hands. So he did a great job of that. I'm not a USC guy, but I am very interested to see if this trend continues for them.
Well, and the other big part of this is, and really for both quarterbacks, it could have been, but if this kid can continue to march and make them respectable, you've got a quarterback who is got a couple more years left in him. You can use this with such a big recruiting advantage to help, elevate the program and take a step forward if the coach can get it done. So definitely. This is, like I said, it could be a wash in the overall sense that Stanford, for the conference, that Stanford does it, but getting your blue blood programs back on track, it's a good look.
I really, again, I'm not a USC fan. I never have been, but, I'm not always buying into the narrative that you need the blue bloods, but, maybe you do. And, it might be nice to see them start to get better. Now, they take on BYU next week in Utah. BYU 1-1, just coming off that big upset win of, well, I don't know if we're going to call it upset because Georgia State beat them, but of Tennessee in overtime. Maybe BYU's flying too high and USC could come in and take them. I don't know, but it should be interesting. And, well, congratulations to USC. It was one of the better performances of the weekend. Again, I don't want to dwell too much on all the games in the Pac-12, but let us touch on the other game you spoke on really quick, which was Cal and Washington. How does this happen?
Well, I mean, you got Jacob Eason playing quarterback, a known transfer from Georgia, lost his job to Jake Fromm, transferred, sat out a year. High hopes for this kid. This is a 5-star kid, and going 18 for 30 for 162 yards and a pick,
no TDs
against Cal is just not going to get it done.
Nope.
And
he had 9 rushes for 10 yards, so he's not the runner.
Yeah, they're just this is probably this is an overrated team coming in, and this is why those preseason rankings, are scoffed at by a lot of people because you just really don't know. But you're at home. I mean, you got to be able to take care of business. They were balanced in the rushing attack. I mean, you run for 186 yards. You should expect to win if you're Washington, but
Right.
you just don't get it done in the passing game. And not only that, you give up 192 yards on the ground. And it's not like Cal threw the ball all over either. They only had 111 yards passing. So this just does not speak well. They lost the turnover battle. Cal didn't turn the ball over against a weak opponent. I think overall the look of the Pac-12 took a shot in the chin big time this week.
Yeah, outside of USC, which is a great positive. I mean, the Cal Golden Bears are 2-0 right now. Now they played UC Davis last week. Washington has, who's 1-1, has dropped to number 23 in the rankings, but Cal 20, Washington 19. Jacob Eason he's not the guy. I don't think he's the guy. There's a reason he didn't get the job in Georgia, and I think we're seeing why. And, that's unfortunate, but there are those highly touted recruits that just don't do what we expect them to do and fizzle out. And the whole thing at Georgia with Eason was that he had all the athleticism and talent in the world, but he wasn't a student of the game. Fromm's freshman year, Eason's sophomore year, I heard, because we are here in Atlanta, that Fromm was actually the one getting him into the film room. Like, why is that a freshman coming in, getting in the film room and teaching the guy that's been there a year how to watch film and study the game? So that's where I think the whole problem is with Eason. He's just not a student of the game. And if you're not that as a quarterback, it starts to make me wonder, is this something you really want to do?
Well, I think like anything else, I mean, you jump from high school, you jump to college, jump to the pros. The game elevates drastically from level to level, and you can't get away at the previous level and the next level with the same things. And whether it's getting in the film room, whether it's the fact that you're just physically gifted but don't really see the field well, if you're in a strong high school situation and you got playmakers, you can do that. It's just like we see in college. We see guys that chuck the ball around in college and they get in the pros and all the windows tighten up and they struggle. So, you don't really know what it is. That's certainly not getting in the film room ever, or will never be a good thing for any quarterback. I mean, you're the field general. So, this kid could have some big bumps along the road. And, if you don't see the game elevate quickly, you could end up seeing where you're looking at replacing him. Again, it's early to tell, but at the same time, this is it's bad
not good.
Look. Bad look.
I mean, he's not Jake Browning. That's what they're used to, is somebody who's maybe not be a superstar or a super athleticism, but he's a student of the game, knows how to manage the game, knows the plays, knows the play calls, knows where to check off, knows to audible, and they don't have that anymore. So
yeah, it looks to me like right now what you're looking for is, can Washington State, in this conference in particular, can Washington State continue their offensive explosion? Does Oregon rebound? I mean, they're not out of the conference whatsoever.
Let's stop there really quick. Oregon, now they beat Nevada 77-6. Nevada, remember, beat Purdue last week. Okay, so they beat, a team that in Purdue that a lot of people thought would, rise some more under Brom this year as they did last year. Herbert went 19-26 for Oregon for 310 and 5 TDs. I mean, that's what I expect out of that kid. That's first round. That's, in my mind, could be still the first quarterback picked in the NFL. But they got it done. They threw a ton on, and Nevada just didn't seem to have an answer for them. So hopefully they're getting back to form and they can keep going. You mentioned Washington State. They only played Northern Colorado, so not that they're great or anything, but Washington State went crazy, man. The new quarterback, Anthony Gordon, 31-39, 464 yards. Woo! 4 TDs and a pick. So he did all right too, man. I tell you.
Yeah, and just to understand something about Purdue too, that Nevada beat. So kind of playing the who beats who. Purdue's quarterback put up 509 yards. I'm jumping a little bit ahead to the Big Ten, but just to give you an idea, they got beat by Nevada last week. 509 yards, that's only the third quarterback to ever throw for that. And if you can remember, there was a guy named Drew Brees.
You feel that? That's the feel of the cool breeze.
Yeah, Drew Brees and Kyle Neckbeard Orton. So
I forgot about it.
So those were your two guys that have done that. So again, this was an offensive team that Nevada went out and beat, and then you got Oregon just taking the doors off them. So again, I don't want to say all is lost, but certainly from a perspective standpoint, you're going to have to see, like I said, Oregon continue their march. You're going to want to see Washington State. Do they maintain their offensive explosion, which clearly they've done 2 weeks in a row, and they've got some games coming up that'll tell us some things. And then finally, probably just looking at, does Utah start to show some level of explosion? Because they're not out. They're 2-0.
Yeah, they're not bad.
But we haven't seen what we expect to see out of them as of yet. So those are probably your guys front running right now. Well, the rest of the conference, is struggling, and with USC being a potential to get in the race.
Yep. So good. And then you touched on Arizona State, didn't you? What happened with them?
19-7 against Sacramento State.
Not great, Hermie. Not great. They do have a freshman quarterback there, Jaden Daniels, who was a highly recruited kid. Maybe it was just his second day. But keep in mind, they're 2-0 against Kent State and Sacramento State. So they'll play number 18 Michigan State in East Lansing next week. I think it might tell us a little more about Arizona State. But, for on the whole, the conference is still in flux, and not sure if they're going to be able to get one of those teams into the college football playoff.
Yep.
Okay, so let's move on to the next conference. Dave, what we got?
Let's go to your alma mater and mine, the ACC. I guess I'll lead off with Clemson because I know Bill's going to have some good nuggets here for us to talk about. But clearly, not only are they the class of the ACC, they're the class of college football at this point. Again, we're only 2 holes into a 15-round match here, but they are the clubhouse leader. They look every bit what we expected out of them.
Yeah. Okay. So I think I talked about this before the game, the preview. This is a game last year that was the first big game Trevor had ever played in. I mean, in terms of opponent, because the game before it was Furman, and Kelly was still the starter, Kelly Bryant, and Trevor came in. It was a hostile environment. The 12th man out at College Station. He didn't play well, and we wouldn't have won that game if it weren't for Kelly. And I say all that to say he had this game circled on the calendar probably since the end of that game last year. We looked good, man. I was at the national championship. Trevor had a rough time last week against Georgia Tech. We looked everything like what we looked at in the national title game against Alabama. Trevor went 24 of 35 for 268, a TD and a pick. It's not crazy numbers. He also rushed for a TD, but he didn't need to because we controlled the game. Now, here's the big thing. Last week when we had trouble versus Georgia Tech, it was our run game that bailed us out. This week, the run game wasn't awful. It wasn't our lead back, Travis Etienne, that did the most on the ground. It was his backup, Lynn J. Dixon, number 23. And if you don't know, he's a stud. He's not the power guy that Etienne is, but he is shifty. And he went 11 for 79 in a TD. So here it is. Last year, until the national title, really until the playoff when we played Notre Dame, what I saw these past 2 weeks is what I saw throughout the year. And that was a team growing together and learning how to play together. When we weren't great on offense passing last year, it was the run game that did well, much like last week. When the run game wasn't getting it done, we got it done through the air, much like we did this week. And we put it all together during the game against Notre Dame and then against Alabama in the title game. We were clicking on all cylinders. I'm starting to see that again. We look good, man. I am a Clemson fan and I'm a homer, but we look good. And I walked away from that because that, in my mind, was our toughest game of the year. I was worried about Syracuse in the Carrier Dome. that we go face next week, they got the doors blown off of them by Maryland. Now, that's something we might want to talk about. Maryland looks good, but still, I'm not the DeVito kid at quarterback for Syracuse doesn't scare me as much as Dungy used to, and I don't know that they're going to give us the fight that I expect and a lot of Clemson fans probably expected. So outside of that, I don't know who else is going to give us a game. I don't think anyone until, I'm not even sure the ACC championship. Unfortunately, it may be another scenario where it's just, but, we look like we can roll, man. We look like we can roll. We look good. The defense was phenomenal. It really was 24-3 the whole game. The touchdown they scored to make it 24-10 was the last gasp at the end of the game. At halftime, it was 17-3 us. Texas A&M gets the ball back. Probably about a minute or so left. Not a lot of time. But as opposed to trying to, make anything happen, they kneel on the ball. I mean, Jimbo just bitched out. And that is surprising to me because I didn't think he'd do that. And then in the second half, when it was still, at the end of the third quarter, it's 24-3. And they're still pumping the run game a ton. And that surprised me because I didn't think that they had time. They had to score. They had to score quick and keep going because they weren't stopping us. And so it perplexed me a little bit. But I'm not going to stay too much as a homer on my team. We look good. We deserve to stay at number one. It's going to be a nightmare for a lot of teams in the ACC. And overall, it's going to be whoever faces us is going to have to bring their A game. That's for sure. We're not afraid of having the target on our back. So,
yeah, I mean, I'll say just from a less homer perspective, I agree with your takes on it. I would say this: these were the two interesting takeaways for me, as far as Clemson is concerned. Number one is you can see the feel for the game from Trevor Lawrence is changing. It's evolving, and he has he's really reacting with some of his natural instincts. Some of them you didn't see as a freshman. You saw a little bit more of just his sheer raw talent take over, but now it's like he's figuring the game out on a different level, which should scare the hell out of everybody in college football. I mean, his rollouts, I said it after the last game, his ability to run at the right moment to protect himself, but then when the rollout pass to hit the corner of the end zone,
well,
I mean, just smart football. It's an aspect to his game that is clearly to me evolved, and I was not surprised by it, but to see it start to happen was really interesting to me.
It's a thing of beauty, man. Yeah. I hate to tell you. If you're I don't care if you like us or you don't. If you're a college football fan, to watch that kid play is fun.
Yeah.
And here's the other thing, just in sync, the whole team, especially him and his receivers. The rollout play touchdown to Ross, if you watched, he was on a route. It looked like it might have been a comeback route. And when he saw Trevor break the pocket opposite way to his left, you saw Ross stick his foot in the dirt, put his hand up, right hand in the air as he started running deep, saying, just toss it. And it was a dime. And even over that, you said the running. I mean, it is because, the touchdown he rushed for was a read option. He fed the ball to the back, held it, almost held it too long. I was afraid he might fumbled it because he pulled it out late, but he faked me out. He faked everybody out and ran it in. So looking good, man. And the defense that everybody's worried about, I'm going to say it again, best defensive coordinator in college football, okay? And that's all that matters. He puts those guys in a position to win. We listened to it on ESPNU this morning. Venables, even knowing he has some less than seasoned talent that he's had in the past, he takes what he's got because he does have athletes and puts them in a position to just go and win. And it was great. It was great.
Yeah, and I think the other thing, too, that's really scary in thinking about it, but to me, as complete as Clemson, looked certainly in the game, I don't think we've seen their best football yet, and that's another scary part.
Yeah.
To me, the rest of their year is predicated on their ability to stay focused. They've clearly shown an ability
And
to
stay
do that
healthy.
and stay healthy. And I said that the biggest thing for Clemson walking out of this game, certainly besides a win, was to stay healthy going into next week. And I mean, you watch Texas A&M; their players were dropping like flies.
Yeah, they were going down.
And
a lot. Even their quarterback got. I don't, because when he got hurt, they replayed it. He wasn't hit; it was on a pass, and his front foot, obviously turned after he released the pass, as most quarterbacks have, and he must have tweaked the knee or something. But he wasn't right after that.
Yep.
And I'm not saying that was the difference in the game at all, because Kellen Mond was the guy that was supposed to step up. He had a field day against us last year, and he didn't look great. He was the guy that was supposed to, maybe a potential dark horse Heisman consideration. He didn't look good, and that was really, I think, the downfall of their team. So,
Yep.
Look, we've got, it's every week matters. It's still a long haul ahead. We look good. I am very curious to see how Texas A&M does from here on out, and to see if they're able to bounce back. Who do they have next week?
It's nobody big. Next week's games are, at least on paper, are not. It's not the strongest week for college football.
It looks like they
heats
play
up a little bit next
Lamar.
week,
They
yeah.
play Lamar at home, and then they get into conference play. They got Auburn at home after that. They go to Arkansas, and then they have Bama coming to their house.
Yeah. So moving around to the rest of the ACC,
Why? Why? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead. No, there was some really good stuff. Go.
Yeah, I would say this, the way after kind of walking out of this week, it looks to me, at least at this point, that your next tier in the Atlantic, which is generally, granted it's because of Clemson and Florida State prior to that, Atlantic has really been the championship team every year. But in the Atlantic, we've got NC State and BC have both had some solid performances, 2 games in a row. They're both 2-0, taking care of business. NC State wanted to play both sides of the state. Apparently, their first game was against Eastern Carolina, and their next game was against Western Carolina.
Woo!
So they took care of business. BC, after beating Virginia Tech, had another nice week too as well.
45-13 over Richmond.
Yeah,
the Spiders.
So I think that's the next tier of your Atlantic division. Unfortunately, you touched a little bit on it, and we'll touch a little bit more because I think this is about a better team in Maryland. But DeVito clearly has got some struggles at Syracuse. He cannot run the offense the way that Dungy did last year. You could almost, beforehand say there's a potential they could look ahead. I don't really know. I don't think that's what this was. I think this was just Maryland taking them behind the woodshed. But DeVito clearly does not look equivalent to Dungy, and so therefore I don't see Syracuse really given the surprises they gave last year to a few teams, including Clemson and certainly smoking Florida State. I'm not seeing it. So,
well, DeVito, statistically, he was 28 for 39 with 330 yards, 3 TDs, 1 pick. Here's the thing. What you saw out of Dungy last year was the ability to use his legs, okay? And that made a ton of difference for them. Other teams had to respect not just the run game, but the quarterback running the ball, and that opened things up in the passing game for them. Good day throwing the ball for DeVito, but they're also playing catch-up. The final score was 63-20. So, to say that Maryland at some point might have gone into some zone prevent and they just were, trying to catch up, that's probably what happened. But from a running perspective, DeVito had 7 carries for negative 19 yards. That's, again, the part of Dungy's game as Syracuse's quarterback last year was that run game. And it's not happening there, and they're going to need to flip the script because Maryland threw for 296 yards, 3 TDs, and a pick. Josh Jackson, the transfer from Virginia Tech, who really has resurrected his career because he was a pretty highly touted recruit going to Va Tech. It just fizzled, and now he seems to be kind of performing a little more to his recruitment status. On the ground, Syracuse, one of their backs went 7 for 107, 2 TDs. Another one went 5 for 94 and a TD. Another went 14 for 75 and 2 TDs. Another went 11 for 67 and a TD. Don't allow that next week, because Travis Etienne, Lynn J. Dixon, and even all the boys behind will go absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and I'm not even going to get high on DeVito's statistics because you're talking about a 42-13 game at halftime. They had to go to the air.
Yep.
He took, like I said, 4 sacks in the game. I believe both turnovers were on him. I think he had a fumble and a pick. I think he was on both of them. They were ill-timed. This was never a game. It really wasn't. So it's really hard for me to come away with anything on it. So, again, I think the ACC, the only reason they don't really hurt themselves this week overall is because I don't know how much expectation there was for anybody other than Clemson to really be at the top of the class, and Clemson maintained. So
just running a couple more on the Atlantic side. Congratulations to new head coach Scott Satterfield at Louisville as he picks up he and his staff pick up their first win, and the team. Nice one against Eastern Kentucky, which is a little bit of an in-state rival. Not that they're a formidable opponent, but 42-0, man. Congratulations to Satterfield and all them. And the last one, unfortunately, Dave, Florida State and Louisiana Monroe. Seeing a little bit of the same things we're seeing out of Florida State and not being able to finish. I mean, they're at halftime. It's 14-7, not huge, but came out of the second half and let Louisiana Monroe get back in that game. And if you saw it, it came down. It went to overtime. Louisiana Monroe tied it up at the end. Goes to OT. Florida State scores a touchdown, kicks their extra point. Now it's Louisiana Monroe's turn. They score a touchdown, and I'll be honest, with much more ease in their possession than it took Florida State in their possession, scored right away, and missed the extra point for a loss. I know you took a big sigh of relief on that, but you also were not too thrilled.
No, I mean, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this. I mean, the simple thing that I see is, if you're going to be a good football team, your coaches have to be tremendous leaders on the sidelines, and your quarterback has to be a good leader on the field. You have to have some level of captaincy and leadership on defense. Florida State, I don't know who's got their hands on the wheel right now. That's the real problem. I know Taggart is a more reserved coach, but I expect to see emotion out of him with what we're doing right now. You can go play calling everything. I mean, James Blackman with 2 terrible turnovers in the game. Expecting more out of him, in this offense. The defense, once again, collapses. I don't even know who's leading this defense. Their defensive coordinator seems outmatched in every game. This is a team that's got some guys that were supposed to be leaders this year that have played extremely poor. But I go back to, I just see it on the field every week. I look around and I look at the top-tiered programs and I look at the size of their players, and I just don't see it. I don't see any size, so I see us on defense getting blown off the ball. We're playing safeties at linebacker. Our defensive line continues to flash and then disappear and then flash and then disappear and then disappear and then disappear and then flash, and we do it at all the wrong moments. So this is a team in trouble, and I'm going to kind of get into some of the coaching stuff that's gone on, about it as a whole, not just at the Florida State program, but, this is not a good win. It's not something you hang your hat on. I don't know that they can right the ship, and the problem is because I just don't know who the leader is. And I think as a guy that has a professional background in leading teams, I know you need that, and I just don't see it. So they're in a lot of trouble.
Well, on a positive note, your running back, Cam Akers, number 3, had a great day. Now, granted, he toted the rock 36 times. Let me repeat that. 36 times.
I can't tell you the last time. I don't even know. That's got to be like a record. I can't
That's
remember
a
anybody
lot.
at Florida State. Not your Warwick Dunns, Travis Miners.
Look, I understand riding, the best thing you've got on offense. I do, especially for this team. That's a lot, though. And my concern is that, not just giving him the ball that many times that he can't handle it, but you lose that guy to injury, it's just going to get worse. And that's my concern. Now, he carried it 36 times for 193 yards, 2 TDs. He looked good. I mean, that's your leader there. When's the last time you've seen a running back be the leader of the team in terms of like leader of the team off the field? It just doesn't happen very often. No. And unfortunately for Cam Akers, he came in to college as a very highly touted recruit, and just because of the woes of the team and the offense hasn't been able to shine. This actually shows that he can shine, but mentally he may not feel like he is a leader of the team off the field because, hasn't really been able to do it consistently. And again, I don't think his fault.
No. I don't think I'm a Florida State fan. Because of the product they put out there, I don't know that they're really even worth continuing to talk about at this point.
All right.
They have an opportunity to right the ship, but I'm just not seeing it. If I knew who the leader was, I could see opportunity. I don't know who's leading this team. I can't tell the coach. Last week a simple answer was the coach comes out on Tuesday and says, "Hey, you know what? You can get," everybody overblew that hydration thing, but the coach said something. He goes, "We needed to run the ball a lot more in the second half." My question to him is, you're the head coach. Why aren't you taking control of that? It doesn't mean you take play calling away, but you tell your offensive coordinator, this is how we need to approach the run. And understand, Taggart's an offensive guy. He was calling plays at this time last year until the whole team fell apart. So that's where I don't see leadership. But I will say, let's move on to the
other side of the conference. You touched on a few things. Another congratulations, I think, should go out to Georgia Tech as they pull in their first win of the season under the new head coach, Jeff Collins. What was the final score there? 14-7?
7, yep.
Okay, and who'd they play?
Who did
Georgia Tech
play? South Florida.
It
was 14-10. I apologize. Last
14
I saw
to 10.
14.
Yeah, and South Florida got throttled by Penn State.
Wisconsin.
Wisconsin, that's right.
South Florida is awful.
Yeah, they're not very good. Don't expect them to challenge UCF this year. But
no, their
good,
quarterbacking is very weak.
So good for Georgia Tech on that. And Duke played North Carolina A&T, won 45-13. Got back on track after playing Alabama. The big game in the Coastal Division for the weekend was North Carolina and Miami. It was being played on North Carolina's turf.
Yep. It's 28-25. I will say this, and it hurts a little bit because, again, this was a kid that was a Florida State recruit. All the way up until the last week of signing day. Expectations were him to go to Florida State, and then after Walt Bell left, there were some inklings, even though he kept saying, I'm solid, and he ended up leaving and going to North Carolina as Sam Howell. He has, as a true freshman, he has shown me the value there in the first 2 weeks. Goes in and takes on Miami, and Miami's got some issues too. Again, they're starting a redshirt freshman quarterback,
but they're supposed to be defense, right?
Yeah. But I mean, and the interesting part was North Carolina took the lead in this game and had
early. It was 17-3 in the first quarter. North Carolina.
Yep, and Miami had a comeback and actually took the lead in this game. And Sam Howell goes and drives him back down. He's 16 for 24, so he played within himself in the offense for 274 yards and a couple of touchdowns. Kept him in it right to the end. That now puts Miami at 0-2.
They needed a bounce back here. And, to their new quarterback's credit, Jaron Williams, number 15 for Miami, he had a pretty good day for the most part. Efficient, 30 for 39. For 309 yards. That's funky. 30 for 39 and 309. 2 TDs. And then on the ground, their guy, DJ Dallas, number 13, went 14 for $107. And then their other guy, 23, Cameron Harris, went 10 for 60 and a TD. To your point, it looked like North Carolina had this game controlled most of the game, even though it was close. And then towards the end, Miami comes back, takes the lead, and takes control of the game. And it was the last gasp effort for North Carolina. And this Howell kid drives him down the field and scores to win the game right at the end. So, it's interesting. I definitely. I don't know what to think of Miami. I thought that they, after last week against Florida, that they were a good team that possibly could take that side of the division, and I thought this would be no problem game for them to bounce back, but I was wrong.
Yeah, I mean, again, it's really their first conference game. This is unfortunately the side of this conference has been what's been indicative of their play is that they beat each other up. We have not put any undefeated teams into the conference play, and generally we're looking at between 2 and 4 losses. So I don't want to say that their coastal run is over, but right now, I mean, clearly to me is UNC and UVA, not only by wins, but just by play, are in the driver's seat for the coastal division. UVA's got Florida State coming in next week. That's a game they should win and win decidedly based off what we've seen.
And what was UVA? What did they do this weekend?
UVA had a game against, and I should have had this up already, William and Mary. I knew it was. I couldn't remember who the team was, but I knew it was a low level. They won 52-17. This is a team that's going to be predicated off their quarterback play too as well. Perkins, he went 16-26. Interestingly, went 192 for 2 touchdowns and 2 picks, so it was not the best game in the world for him.
It kind of looked ugly. I watched a little of the game. There were a few passes that were ugly.
Yeah, they ran the ball very well in that game, which, certainly does help. They went for 216 on the ground. So this game was not in doubt. Virginia did get sacked. Virginia had some sacks in the game. They went 5 sacks. They didn't have any other sacks. The one thing about it is they turned the ball over. This game should have been more of a blowout. They're going to have to play a much cleaner game when they play against the ACC going forward. But again, these are the types of games where they get the job done. It looks, you can look at all the hiccups. There are things to clean up on film. Still, I think, look like a very formidable team from a coastal perspective.
Yep. So that's kind of where we're at with the ACC. Not really much change than expected, but outside of Clemson, it'll be interesting to see how the rest of it shakes out.
Yeah, a lot of up and down, but so far there are some teams that are playing for that second tier, and some up and comers that are looking better.
Yep. All right, we're moving on to the next conference. Let's go to the Big Tizzle, the Big Ten.
All right. Well,
so let's start out. Ohio State played Cincinnati. Cincinnati looked good last week, but it was against, now that we see, a very bad UCLA team.
Yep.
But Cincinnati was the team last year that was, someone that UCF would have to worry about in the American. So they're a solid program. It's an in-state rivalry. They're about an hour and a half, 2 hours separate the schools. And, we won't spend too much time on it because Ohio State walked all over them.
Yeah, though I will say I don't know why I didn't know this. I wasn't paying attention, apparently. But what was kind of interesting is the coach for Cincinnati has his Ohio State ties, Luke Fickell. And if you'll remember, I believe Luke Fickell was the one who took over when Urban Meyer got his suspension. Was the guy that took over those
last
few
year?
games? No, it was a few years ago.
Year,
No,
Day took over last year.
Yeah, no, Fickell took over, but he was the defensive coordinator, I believe, for Ohio State.
So much for defense.
Yeah, well, but he knows the program. Came in early on, and I'm talking very early on. Cincinnati was moving the ball, ended up missing a field goal, short field goal, and after that, it all just started coming apart. After Ohio State scored, they drove back down the field, looked like there might be something competitive, and it just came unglued. So Ohio State showed me what I expect out of Ohio State. Fields looked better to me in this game in a sense of, especially on the intermediate and shorter passes than he had in the previous game. Still hit the long ball. Their touchdowns many of them were uncontested. Dobbins just blowing through holes and taking off like lightning. Ohio State just got it done. I don't think again, I said it last week. This was the week where there was a lot of teams that were in no-win situations. It was either meet your expectations or it was look poorly. Ohio State met expectations. Justin Fields had another big day.
Yeah, he went 20 for 25 for 224 yards. He had 2 TDs through the air. He had 2 TDs rushing. You touched on J.K. Dobbins, number 2, Ohio State's starting running back. He went 17 for $141 and 2 TDs. They were rolling, man. They were rolling, and then on the defensive side of the ball, I mean, they shut them out. Shut them down.
Yeah. It was, like I said, it was very, very early, and then it was very, very over.
Yep. All right. So we won't dwell on that, but let's move on to the next game you want to talk about in the Big Ten.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about Penn State first, because my initial feeling in the I forget now how they divide it up. Are they East and West now, right? East and West.
It's East and West. They're in the East with Ohio State and Michigan.
Yeah, they started off. They played a Buffalo team. Buffalo's had a few really good players come out of there.
Yeah, their quarterback Tyree Jackson last year,
but certainly a lower level team, comparatively speaking to their conference play. And Penn State had a struggle.
Yes, they did, especially after blowing doors last week. We expected maybe a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it was at halftime, it was 10-7 Buffalo. But what I expect to see, and again, this is where this idea of there's no real way to, in perception sense, win the game. What I like to see was Penn State came out in the second half, 28-3 in the third quarter.
Made some good adjustments.
Yeah, and just they did what they should have done, which was start lighting the lamp. Their quarterback, I mean, Clifford had a good game in the air and on the ground. He was the leading rusher and the leading passer. Now, the rushing is a little concerning. They had a big rushing week last week against Idaho. But Clifford went 16-22 for 279 and 4 scores. Also went 11 for 51 on the ground. So
very a la Trace McSorley.
Yeah, I think this kid's got he definitely has more physical gifts, at least looking at him and watching him play. McSorley was just battle tested and
he was
tough,
a gamer.
Tough kid.
He was a
gamer. A lot remind me a lot of like a Baker Mayfield, maybe without the talent, but just
or the arrogance.
Yeah, that too. I like the fact that Penn State came back. To me, right now in the East, I look at Penn State and I look at Ohio State, and they're out front to me.
Yep,
they're out front. I think Penn State needs to be a little bit more battle tested. So does Ohio State. But to me, they're the front runners in the East.
All right. Well, that leads us into the next game, which was the Michigan Wolverines. You're rubbing your head there. Why?
I watched this game.
They played Army.
And
this was a game early in the year. We were like, before this year began, this is a game that we figured Michigan may have trouble with the run game and the triple option of Army. And then Army last week goes out and barely squeaks by. Yep. And so then it's like, okay, so maybe they won't have problems. Final score, Michigan 24, Army 21. I think Michigan was ranked in the top 10 of the AP prior to this game. Now they sit at 10. We had talked a lot about this and about the quarterback Shea Patterson off air and about Harbaugh, so I'll let you get into it. Go ahead. What do you think, bro?
Well, let me just say this. I mean, it makes me want to punch myself in the face when I watch teams play service academies. Okay? These people are going to protect our country. Their whole concept is discipline. Discipline.
And they are disciplined.
They're going to tackle well. They're going to be where they're supposed to be. They will not be more athletic than you. Know that going into the game. And I have to say, Shea Patterson to me, close the book. The book's over. Book's over. We read the end. Jim Harbaugh and the whole offensive staff. There was great commentary this morning. Bill and I were listening to a little bit of sports talk radio. Cole Kubelik, yeah, came on and was talking with Danny Cannell and Greg McElroy this morning, and it was like he was speaking out of my mouth. I feel the exact same way he did. This is a team that Michigan, if you watched, I believe that was right at the half where Shea Patterson went down with cramping, and it was 3rd and 2, I believe is what it was. And they were trying to drive the ball and take the lead. And they run the ball up the middle twice. Or no, they did a sweep to the right first, and they brought in McCaffrey, who's a big quarterback. He's recruited. If you know the McCaffrey name, his dad was a receiver in the NFL for several years with Denver and Falcons, right?
Yeah, he played with the Giants too.
And then his brother is this scrubby little running back out of the Carolina Panther.
Yeah, the kid from Stanford. He's not smart.
Yeah, he's not very good. Very tiny. Not a good runner.
Not very good at all.
Yeah, doesn't catch the ball.
He's not a top 3 fantasy running back that you drafted.
No. Boo. So they take this kid and they run an option play, which whole time they have been penetrating and beating Michigan off the blocks. Michigan has not been committed to the run, and they expect the Army team to just all of a sudden forget themselves and their whole discipline concept, and they stuff them. And better yet, they do it on 4th down and 2 and get stuffed again. They were Michigan's area to win in this game was to beat them with athletes, and they ran a game plan that completely took that out of their hands. And part of it is because I don't believe Shea Patterson is the gamer. I've been waiting for the light to turn on. I'm not seeing it turn on. But, I mean, just to why would you try to play the discipline game with a service academy? It happens. Watch Navy. Ask Notre Dame how they feel about Navy.
Right.
Navy out-disciplines them all the time.
Right.
And that's why they get these big wins. It was sad to see them lose that game. I saw so much heart out of that Army team. And, you know, Michigan made the play at the end. I'll give it to them. They got their win. But this team does not impress me. They're going to go, not this week, I believe next week, they got to go to Wisconsin.
Oof.
If they don't do some major changes and commit, and that was Cole's whole point was, don't commit to the run at those moments if you're not committed to it, because your offensive linemen are not going to be in rhythm. And that he was exactly right. And this was just it bothered me to watch that ineptitude. I mean, we're talking about a coach that that created a Stanford juggernaut, took a San Francisco 49ers team to the Super Bowl, and now I don't know what the hell he's doing.
Yeah, well, you know,
I don't know what he's doing.
Yeah, Patterson went 19 of 29 for 207, no TDs, no picks. Now, we talked about Cam Akers for Florida State running the ball a ton. The running back for Michigan, number 24, Zach Charbonnet, had 33 carries for 100 yards and 3 TDs. So he toted the rock a lot. You know, Army was up 14-7 in the third quarter, 14-7. I think it was the third quarter. I can't remember. But then the quarterback for Army on like a 3rd and goal, they were about to score again. And even if they didn't score, they could have at least had a field goal, throws a pick. So, you know, at worst, it should have been 17-7. It's 14-14 in the fourth quarter. Michigan goes for it on a 4th and 2 and has a tackle for loss. They just couldn't run the ball in that game, and that's to your point. Shea Patterson, not good throwing the ball. He fumbled the ball. His ball security is not good overall. In 2 games this year, Michigan has fumbled the ball 7 times. In 2 games. Last year, they only fumbled it a total of 6 times. Okay? Game goes to overtime. The Army kicker misses No,
that was prior to overtime.
Prior to overtime for the win. The Army kicker misses. It's his first field goal attempt of his career. Misses it wide right. Pushes it to overtime.
Yeah, hit it solid, though. Hit it solid. I mean, he just pushed it off, and it was, you know, it was some length, but he
missed it. But it allows Michigan to get back into the game in overtime. Michigan scores. It's Army's turn with the ball, and the defense for Michigan comes up with a turnover. Army drops back for a pass, which, again, they mostly run, but they drop back for a pass. Guy gets hit off the backside, fumbles the ball, game over. So it was a eke-out win for them, and they just, I don't know.
In a way, they're a little bit like Florida State to me in this sense. Like, I don't know who's leading this team. I don't know what their game plan is. When you watch them, I'm confused because I don't want to say Army gave them opportunities, but Army is going to run for 3 yards a carry over and over and over again. They have a chart that says that they're going to go for it on 4th down if the yardage is in with X amount. No matter where they are on the field, they have a chart for this because they just believe that they can just continue to chip away at you. And again, like the problem with triple option teams, and we've discussed this before, we hated playing against Georgia Tech and Paul Johnson because the problem was if you got down by 2 scores, you couldn't get back in the game because they would just run the clock out on you. If you got up on them by 2 scores, though, and you used your athletes, then they couldn't catch up to you because they couldn't throw the ball.
Yeah,
and that's
you put
what
them out of their element.
And that is the mode for this. You have to tackle well, and you have to let your athletes out-athlete their guys because – understand something, service academies, and I have a few friends that went to them, you have to play 2 sports in a service academy when you go to these schools. I had a friend that went and played hockey at West Point, and he had to play football because they make you play because they got to be able to field these teams. And so it's not like they go in and they have these horses that are just going to carry you. And you would just think that Harbaugh, with all his experience, would have figured it out. You can tell this game frustrated me the most because I just wanted Army to win because they deserved it more. They played with heart, and I got to say I love my service academies. I love my military, so it would have been nice to see. But it was ineptitude on the part of Michigan, and they should have paid for it.
Yep. So we'll see. I definitely don't think Michigan's got a shot at the playoff. They were one of the teams I think a lot of people thought might get there, and I'm just not seeing it. Running down some other scores before we stop on another game in this conference. You had Iowa at home. They're ranked 20 going into the game, taking on the Rutgers Scarlet Knights. Blanked them 30-0. Not that Rutgers is a huge opponent. I think, though, on the other side, Iowa is something to worry about. They always play well at home in Kinnick. It doesn't matter who it is. And it looks like they're to the form they were, I think, a couple years back that they were, potentially could slide in.
And they give teams from the East hell. Somebody always pays a price to Iowa, even if they're not, a highly ranked team.
Right, and so they're 2-0 right now. Purdue, as we mentioned earlier, lost to Nevada last week. They played at home against the Vanderbilt Commodores of the SEC, won 42-24. So they got themselves on track again. Not that Vandy, I think, is having a little trouble offensively. Look, they got the stud running back in Keyshawn, whatever, however you want to call him, and he didn't get enough love this week. They need to just ride that dude because that's what they got. And I don't know if they can. I don't know if their offensive line and their run blocking is good enough for the guy, but he's a stud. But, it is an SEC opponent, and they won.
Yep. And Purdue, to repeat, Sindelar for Purdue put up 509 yards in the air with 5 touchdowns and a pick. So big offensive game from them. The receiver, Moore, had 13 receptions for 220 yards.
And Rondell Moore didn't do anything last week. And he's a stud that everybody was looking forward to. So it's good to see him get on track. Illinois went to Connecticut and beat the Huskies 31-23. You had
Lovey-Dovey Smith, the head coach. Looks like Santa Claus if he still has his beard. I don't know if he shaved it since the beginning of the year.
That's right. Indiana Hoosiers were at home against the Eastern Illinois Panthers, won 52-0. You had Michigan State at home against Western Michigan, and they won 51-17.
Yep.
And you had the Gophers going on the road to Fresno State and beating the Bulldogs in double overtime, 38-35. So now let's talk about, I got 3 more games in the conference I want to touch on. First and foremost, the ACC's other ranked team at 21, the Syracuse Orangemen, travel to College Park, Maryland to take on the Terps. Fear the Turtle. It was a blowout. And we touched on it about me concerned about going to Syracuse with Clemson next week to the Carrier Dome. This is not good. I can't tell you that they were looking forward. Maybe they were. I don't know why you would. 63-20, my friend.
Mind you, this is a Maryland team that absolutely lit the lamp last week offensively. I think it was 79-0 they won, so they were coming in with a head of steam on offense.
They were.
Not one to look past.
And not that they weren't that good last year, Maryland. And, they're in the are they in the East of the Big Ten?
Yep.
So they're gonna have a tough time with your. Obviously, I'm not worried so much about Michigan anymore, but having Penn State and Ohio State on the schedule could be tough. But man, they look good. The past 2 weeks, they have looked good.
Well, and let me just say this: this is the part you can look statistically at their quarterback, Josh Jackson, and I got some questions about the way he was being coached in Virginia Tech, seeing how offensively well he's played. But one of the big things is they are running the rock. McFarland, man, that kid can run. And he wasn't even the best yards per carry. He was at 5.4 yards a carry.
That's right.
They had Leak going 7 for 107 and 2 scores.
Yep.
Funk. Ran 5 for 94.
Funk out if you don't like
what
you see here.
They were just snapping off run after run after run, setting up the pass. This was an offensive explosion. It was
21-7 the first quarter. It was 42-13 at half. At no point in the game did Syracuse have a chance.
No. And they did some favors for Maryland. Syracuse did with some turnovers, but the fact was Maryland took it to them. So you better be tackling well against this Maryland team, especially look out, your Penn States and your Ohio States, because they can snap the run. They look good. I got to tell you, you're talking about coaching. You're talking about Loxley coming in there.
Loxley's done a good job.
You're bringing in a transfer quarterback. He is got this team believing that they can do what they need to do offensively. Certainly, I want to see him play against the heavyweights, but don't look past them. I will tell you that. What I watched, I see that spark in that team. They believe in what they're doing, and I'm kind of glad they're out of the ACC because Florida State would have had to play them, and oh my God, they might score 100 on us.
Yep. Okay, the next game of the conference I want to touch on is the Wisconsin Badgers from the Big Ten West. They had the Central Michigan Chippewas coming to town, and it was look, Wisconsin blew the doors off South Florida 49-zip last week. Now again, they blow the doors off. Granted, it was Central Michigan 61-zip. Jonathan Taylor is going crazy. He is definitely back in the Heisman race. But more so, you're talking about 2 shutouts. That defense is playing well. And again, not that they're formidable opponents, but if you're playing a weaker team and you're a big-time school, you do what they just did the past 2 weeks. You shut them out, and they have a bagel on the scoreboard.
Yeah, and here's the whole thing is these scores could have been, in both games, could have been much worse. These games were over before they even began, which you like to see from Wisconsin. They look good. To me, they are the clear front runner in the West. I'm still not exactly sure what I got in Iowa and Michigan State right now. They've played well, but just given the competition they've played and the games, have not looked like this. I've watched some of the other games, but man, this Wisconsin team, and I got to tell you, Mr. Harbaugh, you better be ready in 2 weeks because Jonathan Taylor he's coming to town, beast. And they're doing what Wisconsin does, and that is we expect them to control the line of scrimmage, have a running back that's a one cut. The kid, when he gets to that second level, goodbye. So you better not let him get second level, and playing great defense.
Yeah, they have the big uglies up front on the offensive line, and they are doing the job for Taylor. So don't forget that the success that man has, you never the line never gets credit, but they are good. Yep. And you said it. 2 weeks from now they play Michigan. Well, guess what? Michigan has to go to Wisconsin. 1. Yep. 2, Michigan has a game next week. Wisconsin does not.
Yep.
So they have a bye week and an extra week to prepare for the Harbauskis, and it's going to spell trouble, man.
I think Michigan needs that game. They
They
gotta
need
clean
it
some
to get
stuff
back
up.
in it. And then you mentioned Iowa. Yeah, I mean, that could be a tough game. Guess what? Iowa has to go to Wisconsin. You mentioned Michigan State. Tough game. Guess what? Michigan State has to go to Wisconsin.
Yep.
So it's jump around time, folks. Light up the friggin' house of pain, and let's see the red and white bouncing all over the stadium. Good for them. Good for them.
Yep.
The last game in the conference I do want to touch on because it's an absolute disaster for Mr. Scott Frost. What is he, third year?
Second year.
Second year. Oh, Nebraska, the dark horse. They take on Colorado. It was in Colorado, right?
Yes.
I believe it
Yep,
was.
It was. It was in Colorado.
And
In Boulder.
Colorado was actually down in this game 17-7 going into the fourth quarter and pulls off in their own end zone a 96-yard flea flicker for a touchdown. Awesome.
Yep.
That's fun football right there. You know that the defense is not prepared for something like that because in their mind, they're like, there's no way they're going to try some nonsense like that. They did. Winning.
But see, that to me though, that's what you do. You are not expected to win this game. You go in, and now they were talking about it on TV about, I don't know if I really like this play because what happens if you don't make it? And the point is, they're the underdog.
You got to take shots.
You got to put pressure on that team, and they did, and they made them look stupid.
Oh, it was ugly.
I loved it. I love the play call. That's exactly what you do if you're that coach, Mel Tucker.
Mel Tucker coming from Georgia.
Yeah.
He's now 2-0 because Colorado goes on to win that game.
Yeah.
It's 14-14 in the fourth quarter. Michigan, I'm sorry. Blah, I'm looking at the wrong game. Michigan. Ha! It was back and forth in the fourth quarter, is what I meant to say. After that flea flicker, 17-14, Nebraska comes back and scores. It's back and forth. And then late in the fourth quarter, the quarterback for Colorado, Montez, real late. You're talking 53 seconds left in the game. Throws this nice TD toss to tie the game. They go into OT. Colorado holds Nebraska. And then the Nebraska kicker comes out for a field goal to put their points on the board. Shanks it wide right. The rest is history. 34-31 Colorado win. And then they showed this stat because this was a big thing last year. Nebraska had 4 wins, which they rattled off at the end of the season. And one of the reasons everybody was talking about them as a potential dark horse this year is because most of the games they lost was by 5 points or less. Okay? A ton of games lost just barely. Well, you know what? A loss is a loss is a loss. You need to finish because they showed us today that under Scott Frost, Nebraska is 1-6 in those games decided by 5 points or less. That's a coaching issue in my mind. You need to figure it out and help your team and finish.
Yeah, I mean, you said it all. I like the way Colorado did exactly what I would want to do in that scenario. Mel Tucker had the stones to get out there and be aggressive, and they kept them on their heels, and they eked it out at the end the right way. Nebraska,
They're not going anywhere. They're trouble. All right. Well, that wraps up the Big Ten. So we're going to move on to the Big 12. Where do we want to start? You want to start with the big dogs?
I think. Well, now let's just finish with that because I think we can roll through the rest of this pretty fast. Certainly the highlight game was the Texas LSU game. So I think really what we saw. Maybe just I'll hit a couple of points and you can jump. I mean, I don't think the Big 12 showed anything more than that this is pretty much a 2-horse race with maybe one kind of riding out on the edges. But, I mean, we had West Virginia get the pants beat off them by Missouri. I don't know that I learned more about Missouri or if I just learned that West Virginia really blows at this point.
Yeah, they're not very good, but good for Kelly Bryant. He had a bounce-back week, transfer from Clemson, and led his team to victory.
Yeah, I mean, you got Kansas got beat by Coastal Carolina at home, 12-7.
Poor Les, man. I really wanted for him. I love Les Miles.
Yeah, but that just was not. That's not good look. So some other games that we saw there. Oklahoma dismantled South Dakota. I don't think that's a shock. I think Jalen Hurts looked good. Their offense looked good. Their
CD Lamb,
CeeDee Lamb.
He had a day. I mean, he went 6 for $144 and a TD. Jalen himself was 14 for 18, 259, 3 TDs. So they were doing. I mean, South Dakota, but they were doing their thing.
Yeah, I mean, you had Baylor blowing out Texas San Antonio. You had Texas Tech taking on UTEP, hitting the Miners and knocking them back into the mine shaft.
Yeah.
It was 38-3. Their quarterback, again, threw the ball a lot. Not a horribly prolific day, given Texas Tech's, propensity to throw the ball around. He went 30 for 45, 260, 3 touchdowns and a pick. So they kind of just did, expectation. Probably looked to them to maybe score some more points in that game. Didn't really do it. I would say, in my mind, and feel free to jump in, but my mind, the team that third team that's kind of just out there on the fridge is Kansas State playing Bowling Green. They've had 2 weeks in a row where they've laid the wood. They played Nicholls State before that and Bowling Green, so not really big opponents. What they're showing right now is that they are going to absolutely run the ball down your throat. They went for 333 yards on the ground. They did it against Nicholls State, same thing. They had big running games. So we don't know what we have in them yet. We do know that Schneider is known to have a defensive team, likes to run the ball a little bit, and we want to see them kind of up against the two juggernauts in Oklahoma and Texas that we saw. So I don't know if you want to add any more. I didn't see anything else really that kind of was a wow moment.
No, but you mentioned the third team looking in. You're saying who? Kansas State. Yeah, I mean, we'll see. I mean, I don't know if Kansas State is that of old with Snyder coaching them. It's been a while. The team I do think there is a third team looking in, and you mentioned them. That's Baylor. I'd be, if I were, just for the mere fact that they can score. They're offensively potent, and Baylor's a team that was got turned around last year, and I think that they can make a run this year, and they might be a team that a Texas or an Oklahoma has to worry about. But you touched on Oklahoma, and let's wrap the Big 12 up because we're moving into the SEC next with a great segue and dive in, for a minute or two on the biggest game of the day, which was LSU versus Texas.
So my takeaway from this game, and again, I'm going to focus heavily on the Big 12 side because we're going to flip over and talk SEC and talk a little bit more, and LSU certainly is involved in that conversation. But what I saw, and I kind of expected this, I was expecting it a little bit more out of Ellinger, but it was really some of the rest of the offensive team. Going into this game, I felt like LSU, even though they have been down for a little while, comparatively speaking, they do play in these big matchups and playing with emotion. I thought that Texas, if they could control their emotions, could do better, but I expected them to struggle a little bit out of the gate if I was to be a betting man. And I think that kind of happened. They had the drop ball in the end zone by the running back from Ellinger.
Very early, yeah.
Yeah, early on where they spotted LSU points. You just generally don't want to spot an LSU team.
No.
But I will say this, they came back and they got a team. This game was high level football all the way around. I thought they attacked an LSU secondary that was, they've got a potential top 10 pick.
Yeah, I mean,
in Delpit, and
we talked about DBU, and then they came out and actually Texas had T-shirts like saying the real DBU, and I got to be honest, I mean, it was a great game. We talked about it being a heavyweight matchup, and it was blow for blow throughout the game. Yep. Heavyweight shots left and right. But from a defensive perspective, especially from the secondary, on both sides of the ball. I mean, Joe Burrow, the quarterback for LSU, went 31 of 39 for 471, 4 TDs and a pick. Ellinger went 31 for 47, 401 and 4 TDs, no picks. So both quarterbacks break the 400-yard mark passing. That does surprise me a little, considering the secondaries for both teams are pretty good. LSU's could be the best, but yeah, man, it got chippy before the game. Even before it started, they're getting at each other's throat on the field.
Yep.
And in a big game like this, I don't mind it. Nothing got out of control, but a little bit of jawing. It makes it a little more fun for the viewing audience.
Well, both teams to me played like they understood what was at stake and rose to the challenge. Like, I will say, LSU beat Texas. It was not nobody lost this game, and I think they beat Texas. And if I'm Texas, I got my head up high. Tom Herman, you pat your quarterback and the rest of your team on the back. They came back. This game could have got out of hand. It could have. Like, they could have backed off.
I told you, like Texas scores and puts it at the end of the game, probably like 2-3 minutes left, and then puts it within a 1-score game. And then LSU comes out, and Joe Burrow is getting rushed. I think it was even a third down play, 3rd and long. Manages to feel his way through the pocket, hits 6'3" wide receiver Jefferson, he is incredible, this kid, on a crossing route, who he led him through a great ball, led him open so that he could have yards after the catch, and he just makes a great move, takes it to the house, and again, with less than 2 minutes, LSU is up by 2 scores. Ellinger's not phased, comes on the field and quickly marches them down to score again. And then they show Ellinger on the sideline, and they're still down with like a minute to play. So it requires an onside kick, which
is like 45 seconds.
And they almost had that onside kick, and you was whoa. But the fact of the matter is, they show Ellinger on the sideline, and he looked calm, poised, ready to go. He had the confidence that almost they were going to get the onside kick, and he was going to drive them down for the win. So that's incredible. And I know that, they lost. It's a big game. I like Tom Herman, Texas's head coach. Good head on his shoulders. After the game, said all the right things. They still have everything in front of them. It was, he's a good coach. And at the end of the day, you got a guy like Ellinger who's a leader who never quits. You're going to be in every game.
Yeah. I think both teams, what will be interesting and will be fun to watch is both teams, I believe, walked out of this game believing that they are playoff teams.
Yep.
And that, to me, means that you better be ready when either one of these teams comes to town or you go to their town. And that's great. That sets up for future games in this college football season that are going to be exciting to watch. I love what I saw out of both teams. They went shot for shot. It was a heavyweight title fight. To me, best game of the year so far. Not even close. Granted, we're only 2 weeks in, but you'll struggle to see a game get played like this against two teams that you literally watched. And I didn't look at either one and go, man, God, if they just had this on this side of the ball or this at this position. It was, and they attacked each other's strengths, which was very impressive.
Yeah,
I mean,
they didn't back. Burrow. They didn't back off the secondary on either side of the ball. The one thing, I guess, if there's one thing I would be critical of for really both defenses, was the tackling. There was some tackling issues, and quite frankly, they could have changed the game quite early on either side of the ball if tackles had been made that were right there. But at the end of the day. This is, they didn't back off the strengths. I mean, if Texas's secondary is good, well, LSU had 3 receivers go over 100 yards in that game. That's impressive. Impressive. And that's, this new offense under former NFL coordinator Joe Brady, who's calling the plays for LSU, is clicking, man. I mean, they are scorching the turf out there. Yeah. And like I said before, Burrow, he throws people open. He allows his receivers to catch the ball and be able to have yards after the catch. And it's impressive. They're in sync like there's no tomorrow. And I do legitimately think have a shot at Alabama this year. And I said it after the game, like they're top 4 now. I think they're 4. I think they bounced Oklahoma out of the 4 position.
Yep.
So
OSU and
I'll be
Oklahoma.
honest with you. We had a big game, so I don't think we should move from number 1. But Bama looked good and Georgia looked good playing scrubs. Right now, in my mind, LSU should be 2 because they had a big game and they performed.
Well, the good part about all that is that it will settle itself. I guess from just sticking on the Big 12 before we move into the SEC, and I'm going to touch on LSU a little bit in the SEC talk, but with the Big 12, man, did the Red River rivalry, the shootout just got real interesting.
Yeah,
that is going to be must-see TV to me.
When is that game?
That is, I believe, the 12th
of October.
That is going to be a fun one. Probably, in my mind, that'll decide because I think the Big 12 is bringing a team out to the playoff. I at least in what I'm seeing so far, again, it is early. We can't overreact, but I will say I loved what I saw in this game from Texas, and I think Herman's got them firing, and I don't think they walk out of this game with their head down.
No,
I think they walk out. They believe more after the game than they did before the game, even with the loss.
For sure. Okay, well, let's move into the SEC, my friend. We've touched on this game, so we've talked about LSU. Is there more you want to say about LSU?
Well, I guess I'll echo your thoughts a little bit. Some things that I saw that I'll just add on, and then I think we can move into the other games. But what I loved about this was I talked about how they got out to the lead, and then they started to lose that lead. And I watched a team that could have started to fold. I mean, remember, they're on the road. They're on the road. Momentum. Mighty Mo had changed addresses at several points in that game. And to their detriment, after the taking, 20-7? I believe the lead. So that what I saw was no quit. What I really liked is 2 things. Number one, Burrow obviously played a very, very good game. This is the first time I've watched an LSU quarterback that I can remember. I'm trying to think. Like, I'm going back to like Jordan Jefferson, for that, like Matt Mock and Jamarcus Russell. Like, these are Mettenberger, yeah. Like, I watched guys that had no ability to go to second and third reads. It was run the ball, hit my open pass, eyeballing receivers, and these were good teams, LSU defenses that were monsters. I watched Burrow, that on-the-money pass you talked about to Jefferson, the back shoulder throw for a touchdown.
Yep. Nice. Nowhere else anybody could have gotten that but his receiver.
Yeah, and if you watch, and he watched that receiver, but what he also saw was the Texas D-back was struggling to catch up and was going to have no way to turn around, threw it off his back. Well, it was to the left side, off the receiver's back right shoulder. I mean, he made plays. I watched him scan the field and go to second and third reads, and that is just not indicative of LSU quarterbacking historically. And then I go to the last piece, which is the coach, Ed Orgeron. I mean, a guy that, had some good years at Mississippi. They brought him over at Ole Miss. They brought him over, and it was not a real, like, hey, everybody get all excited pick.
Remember, he went to Southern Cal.
And Tank, but he came back as a defensive coach, and then when Les Miles left, it was like we need to revamp this team, and they didn't. They brought an internal coach in as a candidate. They get smashed by Alabama last year, and kind of on the ropes. And you look and you go to a guy that has just not had that quarterback because they've and think too is LSU. When you talk about recruiting, it used to be you are not going to get guys out of Louisiana, and all of a sudden, last few years, like Alabama, Clemson,
Travis Etienne, he comes from a little town right next to Baton Rouge.
Yeah, and they started to get plucked. So, like some things were in question that, that was one of the states I would say that could draw a line around their state, and if they wanted you, they could have you. And so some of the polish was coming off the apple, and good on Orgeron getting this kid doing what we want to see LSU doing, and they looked good. So that's the high points I came away from on the LSU side with this game. And I agree with you. It to me is 1 and 1A with Alabama and LSU right now, and so I'm juiced for that game.
Yeah, I mean, look, Orgeron may be a slack-jawed yokel. They may have promoted him internally, okay, but don't forget. Dabo Swinney was promoted internally.
D plus higher according to ESPN. At the
Right.
time.
Okay. And it took him a minute. He wasn't doing what he's doing now right out the gates, but he started to build. And what do you always talk about when you talk about Clemson and Dabo? The people he surrounds himself with. I mentioned it earlier. Joe Brady was brought in from the NFL to be the offensive coordinator, and it's showing. He's surrounding himself with coaches that are doing a good job and taking advantage of the athletes they have on their team. And, if there's one thing I'll say, Alabama's Alabama. They'll be okay. I mean, they won 62-10 over New Mexico State. Okay, Tua went crazy, Judy went crazy, but one thing, and they picked it up obviously this week, but still a little concern is the running game from Alabama. I mean, comparatively to what we're used to in the past.
It doesn't look the same. I agree.
So I say that to say, I mean, the passing was great for LSU. They ran the ball well too. So complete teams, if you're talking about both those, Alabama and LSU. I don't know, man. I mean, if they have both dimensions going for LSU and somehow the running game doesn't get going the way we expect it to for Alabama and they become one-dimensional, that's a game. That's a game.
I'm going to say something that I think, it would depend how the games are played, but I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want your thoughts on this because this is where it gets real interesting, and we're real early, so we can still talk about this and argue, but LSU plays Alabama on November 2nd. Okay, so we're talking about late in the year, later than usually. I thought they usually played somewhere in mid-October, but maybe I'm wrong.
It's probably close.
So it's later in the year.
Where's the game?
The game is being played in Alabama.
Okay.
Okay, so give you a scenario. So we're both undefeated. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Close game. Whoever wins, wins. All right, which means somebody's got to lose.
I know what's coming. Go ahead.
So Alabama plays we'll say Alabama wins, but I'm not even predicting that. I'll just pick a team. Alabama wins, plays Georgia, undefeated in the playoff. Dismantles Georgia. Does LSU go to the college football playoff with that one loss on their record over Georgia? Because you'd have one-loss teams. I know there's a lot that can happen between now and then.
It's such a scenario. Again, I think it depends.
Meaning, can two teams come out of the same side of the conference? That's the question.
I think they can because it's about the best teams. And if LSU continues on this track and they're undefeated and it's a close game against Alabama, it also depends on what happens if in your scenario in the championship game. If Alabama blows the doors off Georgia, then I would say no question. If it's a close game, then you're talking about a one-loss Georgia team that lost Alabama close and a one-loss LSU team that lost Alabama close, but Georgia made it to the championship game, then you're going to hit a little bit of a conundrum. Do I think that it can happen?
Could you have three teams?
No, I don't think you could. I just don't see that happening. I don't.
Because, Georgia's going to have a challenge because their resume is not going to include a win in Austin.
And that's why I think Georgia needs to not just run the table, but if they don't beat Alabama, it's got to be a butt hair close of a score. Because of what you said, the resume. And I just don't see them pulling three teams from the SEC to the college football playoffs. So you're talking Georgia. What you're saying is it's Georgia, Clemson, Alabama, LSU. I don't see that. I just don't. I think there's too many. I think with what's going on in the Big Ten, you're going to see a powerful team there at the end in the championship game, whether it's Wisconsin, whether it's Iowa on that side, or whether it's Ohio State and Penn State on the other.
You might even get a Texas, Oklahoma.
And then you got to talk about Texas, Oklahoma, man. I just don't see those teams, even with a one-loss compared to a one-loss SEC team. I don't see it because one of those teams, I think, in the Big Ten or the Big 12, if they have they could be one loss, but one of them will be a conference champion.
Yeah, I got to say, though, this is exciting because I think you've got, I don't want to discount Georgia at this point, but you get undefeated Alabama and LSU in November. It could get real interesting.
Sure. So, I don't want to, we talked a lot about it. It was the matchup we expected. I like that. That's awesome. Just to kind of run down, because most of the SEC played, less than spectacular opponents. Georgia played Murray State at home, won 63-17. One thing we had talked about with Georgia was the sack issue. It looks like they did pretty good. I'm counting up. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they have probably around 5 sacks in that game. So now the opposition obviously is not nearly to that of another SEC opponent, but at least you see some life from the defensive side of the ball for Georgia, and they're able to get to the quarterback. So they took that one over. We touched on Alabama, 62-10 over New Mexico State. Tua went 16-24 for 227 and 3 TDs. Backup quarterback came in, had a TD. Henry Ruggs had a 75-yard touchdown grab. That was the only one he had. I'm sorry. It was an end around. It was a rush. From a receiving standpoint, Ruggs went 4 for 66 and a TD. Jerry Jeudy did his thing again, though. Obviously, Heisman candidate from the wide receiver position, if you're going to have one. NFL first-round draft pick prospect, 8 for 103 with 3 TDs. Number 4 is a stud, so I don't anticipate that to drop off at all there.
Yep.
Florida played Tennessee Martin 45-0. They won last week, ugly against Miami.
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago. Well, a week and a half, whatever.
Week 0.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago. That's right. So looks like they're getting back on track. Auburn took on a Tulane team. You don't want to discount Tulane. They can surprise people, but Auburn ended up winning the game 24-6. It was 14-6 Auburn at half. So, and then Tulane didn't score again. So, but it's not a scrub team like, no offense to Georgia or Alabama, but seriously, Murray State and New Mexico State, respectively. I think Tulane's more formidable opponent. Outside of that, what else we got going on before I want to end it in the SEC on the debacle, but what else, anything else out there?
No, just, I think right now, if I was just to, we're starting to tier these teams slowly but surely, and this kind of is the first tiering. I would say the West is definitely LSU and Alabama are serious title contenders. I think you're looking at 2 teams in the West, in Auburn and Texas A&M, that are going to have to scratch and claw. They can still have very good years, but they seem to be a notch below them. I think the rest of the West is pretty weak. In the East, we talked about it. I still think right now it's Georgia and everyone else. And everyone else. They had some bounce-back games. I mean, Felipe Franks had a very efficient, effective day, only had 2 incomplete passes against a bad opponent.
They ran the ball well in Florida, and I think that's why he had a better day, because they were able to run the ball well, and it set him up much easier in the passing game.
I have to look into this, but I think I saw, and I want to make sure that I'm right, I'll check on it, but I believe Tony got injured, so that's a playmaker for Florida.
Yes, it is. We talked about him last week. Yeah. Number 1, he is a stud. He flies around.
Yeah, so, I mean, I think overall the SEC is top-heavy.
South Carolina had a bounce-back win this week, a big win with the new quarterback, Ryan Helinski. And I think in the preview I said Tyler Helinski. I just want to correct myself. This is his brother, Ryan Helinski. Okay? Tyler Helinski was the kid that I think he OD'd or committed suicide. And he played for, was it Stanford?
Yeah, it could have been. That sounds right.
I'll have to look it up, but there is a tie to that kid. And anyways, this the rookie quarterback that was pretty highly recruited. Freshman quarterback that was highly recruited. South Carolina got his chance. Certainly makes the whole move of taking 4-year starter Jake Bentley out of the picture, whether it was he was actually injured or not. I don't know that he'll see the field again this year, but. Yeah, it is what it is.
Yeah, and just a side note, too, with Kentucky, unfortunately losing their starting quarterback, they They always have the upstart, and they win some games that they're not supposed to. Their quarterback went down. Their goals, as Mark Stoops, former Florida State defensive coordinator, says, do not go away. But they took a hit there too as well, in losing him to a knee injury. It doesn't look good. Looks kind of long term, if not season ending. So we'll see what happens. They had a closer game. But, in the East, because we feel like it's a little bit wide open beyond Georgia, that could come into play too and help the other teams look a little better.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about one more game and wrap it up for the recap of Week 2 of college football. Oh, Rocky Top, Tennessee. See me do what? See me do nada. Mr. Jeremy Pruitt. What is going on, son? This team plays BYU at home after losing this incredible upset that Georgia State pulled off last week in their house. I mean, I got to put it on the coaching, man. They have talent there, okay? And you have the crowd too. I mean, the fans, despite everything, still are filling 100,000 capacity stadium to the gills. And this team comes off such an upset, you figure they're going to come out pissed off, quite frankly. Pissed off. And they lay a fargan egg against BYU. I don't know where to go from here if I'm that coach. I mean, I don't know what to do. I mean, he should be embarrassed. He should be embarrassed. In the fourth quarter, Tennessee is up 16-13. There is 20 seconds left, and it's 3rd and 6 for BYU. Quarterback Zach Wilson throws a deep ball that put them in field goal range for them to tie it up and take it to OT. The rest is history. I mean, BYU goes into OT, wins the game 29-26. At what point, it's just like I said with Florida State, does this coach say, listen, guys, we've got to finish? It's called competitive toughness. In the NFL, when you're getting scouted to go into the NFL, one of the 5 main critical factors that scouts look for in players is competitive toughness. When the chips are against, when everything's against you, when you're in a tough spot, whether you're losing or you got to finish. Grit is the ability to finish, and this team doesn't have any of it. It baffles me because they look like they don't even want to be playing football.
Well, I'm going to springboard off something I wanted to wrap up with that. And I don't know if anybody's really broken this down before. I haven't seen it, but it just got me thinking because we were talking about Nebraska, and certainly as a Florida State fan and alumnus, I know what's going on with Willie Taggart. I want to read something to you briefly here, okay? And there was, from Athlon Sports, there was a grading of coaches, which I don't really care about the grade, that were hired in 2018. And I'm going to read a list to you, and then I'm going to make a comment, and then I'm going to let you discuss. All right?
Discuss.
I'm going to do it in the order they graded him in, but I don't care what the grades were. Scott Frost, hired by Nebraska. Dan Mullen, hired by Florida. Chip Kelly, hired by UCLA. Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M. Willie Taggart at Florida State. Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State. Chad Morris at Arkansas. Kevin Sumlin at Arizona. Jeremy Pruitt at Tennessee. Steve Campbell, South Alabama. I'm going to jump a little bit, and because there's some names here from some smaller programs. Matt Luke at Ole Miss. And I'm going to say this. With the exception of Dan Mullen and Jimbo Fisher, who I would say, at best, the jury is still out to how strong of a hire those were.
Well, I mean, for Jimbo, I think it's comparatively to the amount of money they spend on the guy too.
Right. So meaning, because I mean, Florida's a program with resources. Texas A&M has massive resources, and Fisher certainly had a name and a national title and a history with Nick Saban. Beyond that, if these coaches were vineyards in Napa Valley, they would burn the friggin' fields right now. I have
Plant a new crop.
I have not seen that many coaches in that many programs perform that poorly in one shot. I mean, and we're talking about names.
I mean, look,
Scott Frost going back to his alma mater. You got Chip Kelly, Willie Taggart going to the team he grew up rooting for. These were some of your higher rated, and understand the order I read them in was the highest grades given to the coaches. Every one of the top 5 or 6 I mentioned were A- or better. I mean, Chad Morris had explosive years at Clemson. Yep. Arkansas is a mess.
They're a mess. They don't have the personnel to run it, but yep. You know, we talked about it too in podcasts past. You have to work with what you got too. You got to be able to adjust a little bit. You can't just say it's a wash for the year and we're waiting on the next year's recruiting class and then the next year's recruiting class. You got to figure out now and start to make steps to move in that right direction.
And the fact of the matter is, what it's good about looking at this is if you're going back and you know, we're now getting into year 2. And, I mean, you've got a significant number of these coaches. I mean, Willie Taggart's on the hot seat. Chip Kelly's on
Jeremy Pruitt for sure. Clay Helton we talked about. Now he had a good win. Maybe they're going to bounce back. I think his seat, got a little less hot. Jim Harbaugh, he's not in his second year.
Well, those aren't even in this. But
those guys too. These are guys. I mean, like these are coaches out there that are not doing a good job. But they're high flying names.
Hot seats right now. I mean, I don't know that Jeremy Pruitt makes it past this week, much less.
I don't know if Taggart will make it through the year. I don't know that Chip Kelly will make it through the year
to do that. But I mean, and I just like so. If you look at that hiring class. Right now, I guess I got to say, Dan
Athlon was wrong with their grades.
Well, not only that, but Dan Mullen probably is in one of the best positions in the sense that Florida was pretty poor the year before, and he took him to a 10-win season. Fisher's biggest problem is he's going to have to compete with what they paid him. So he's not going anywhere, even if they have 3-4 losses. But this team is they expect to beat the Alabamas and the LSUs in the next 2 to 3 years, or else that's going to become a very tenuous situation. I mean, Kevin Sumlin is just showing that he's not a head coach.
No, he's a coordinator.
I mean, probably going down, they had Mario Cristobal as the 13th best coach. I got to say, he's probably number 2 of this list at this point.
I like Cristobal. I think he's much better than that.
I mean, Josh Heupel at UCF, it was number 16. Again, it's UCF. It's always going to be hard to really, truly grade them. And the rest of these guys went to smaller programs. But, I mean, Herm Edwards was 21 at Arizona State, and how much is everybody loving him? It just, it blows my mind. And I guess in a way I kind of look at it and go, man, what did Florida State, if those were the best coaches, what would Florida State have had to pick with? And then I look at the other teams and they're probably feeling the same way.
Yeah, it's not good. I think that it's unfortunate because I never want to see these guys all have families. Okay. They're older guys or coaches. They have families and, you try to put yourself in their shoes and, it's tough with these 18 to 22-year-old kids, but coaching in college is everything. We've went over that. And, I don't want to say you want to quit on somebody, certainly not mid-season, but, if it doesn't go right at the end of the season, if you're not already ousted, you might think about just bowing out respectively and honorably because it's not working. Okay. I mean, like this Garantano kid, the quarterback for Tennessee, this experiment's been going on since last year and he's just not getting it done. So at what point as the coach do you say, man, we got to try to make a change and find some sort of spark? It's like that with a lot of these coaches, like, the kid at UCLA, DRC, he was a highly touted recruit, especially from a dual threat perspective, which you'd think is exactly what Chip Kelly needs. And he looks like a deer in headlights back there most of the time.
Well, I think what is interesting to me when I look at a lot of these coaches, and I'm gonna pick on the three top ones that are probably most on the hot seat is, I'll take Scott Frost, Willie Taggart, and Chip Kelly. If you look at it, their success was run, where they've had success, or at least a success that deemed them the opportunity to get these jobs, were run out of the spotlight and out of expectation. UCF was not going to get a lot of high profile for Scott Frost. It got him profile, obviously, when they started winning. But if he would have failed to win there, he wasn't under weekly scrutiny that he's under in Nebraska. Sure. Willie Taggart, I mean, let's just look at the schools he's coached at. I mean, he took over, the strongest program he took over was an Oregon team that had no expectations of any sort of titles. And yeah, there was a hope to get back to the Chip Kelly prior administration.
But you still had Herbert at quarterback, which is not really that Chip Kelly offense. But he has Herbert there. I mean, you have...
but as a national... I'm just saying from a perspective, he's not getting the week in, week out review Willie Taggart is of this. Chip Kelly, built an Oregon program that was a nobody. I mean, they had Nike, but they were not. Yeah. They weren't big until Chip Kelly. And now all of a sudden, you see Chip Kelly go to an Eagles team where he has expectations. He falls on his face. He goes to a UCLA team, has expectations. He's falling on his face.
And that's the Philadelphia Eagles.
Yeah, Philadelphia Eagles. He goes, and then you got Scott Frost goes to his alma mater. Now all of a sudden, all the pressure's on him. He's considered the savior, and he can't get it done. Willie Taggart, again, this guy that's a builder of programs, goes to a Florida State team that had a really ugly marriage with Jimbo Fisher, or ugly divorce. And again, these coaches are not responding in the spotlight. And the worst part is, use this word a few times, is I'm watching teams not play with mental toughness. And at times, I'm watching teams, and I particularly can say that about Florida State, quit.
Yeah.
And that is what's scary about this group of coaches. They just don't seem prepared to take on the rigors of what these jobs entail. And it's kind of an amazing thing to see. It gives me a little bit of respect for a guy like Tom Herman, who was these guys at Houston.
He's in a tough position.
And he went to Texas in those first 2 years. I mean, his first game out was getting his ass handed to him by Maryland, which was not
2 years in a row.
Right. And this is a guy that now he believed in what he was doing, and he's built his programs. I have not seen any of that out of these three in particular at this point.
Look, you mentioned Scott Frost. They're in the Big Ten West, and granted, Wisconsin's doing well this year, but let's be honest, that's the side of the Big Ten that is up for grabs.
Yeah,
so, you have there. It's in my mind. He's in there looking at we have a shot here. We don't have to get through Michigan, Ohio State, and Penn State to get there. You might just have to get through a Wisconsin team that might be real good,
or we can take a couple losses and still get to the title game.
And then for Oregon, for that matter, I mean, I know they're in the tougher part of the Pac-12 in the North. But obviously,
perceptionally speaking.
Yeah, perceptionally speaking. But obviously, it's not like running the gauntlet of the SEC. So, I mean, it could be up for grabs there. And then, you mentioned Willie. I mean, look, I know you guys have us on the same side of the conference, and there's a few good teams in there. But for years and years while Jimbo was there, it was either you or us. Whoever won that game won the conference. So competitively speaking, they just need to be able to compete a little bit with us and should be able to take care of the rest of the conference. But it's not there. They're becoming a doormat. So, I don't know, man. I don't know. Again, I hate to see these guys get launched before the season ends. These guys have families too. I know they're getting tons of money, and they'll be okay, and they'll probably have job offers, at least from a coordinator perspective, even if they do get launched. But, it's not good for the coaches, their families, the players, the coaching staff, the program. It's just not good to launch a coach, before the season's out. But if it continues on this trend, I don't know what else there is to do to try to change it.
Yeah, I would say this if I had to bet, just given the scenarios, less about the coaching chops, but I would say Scott Frost and Willie Taggart are most likely to survive this season based off just the contract and what they're looking at. I'm not saying that makes them better, but Chip Kelly could struggle. I don't know what the parameters of his contract are. That's obviously a big play in this, but Pruitt right now, I got to believe he's got to be the closest to
Yep.
And understand Jeremy Pruitt is, we're talking Nick Saban coaching tree. This is a guy that is coordinated for Nick Saban. He's coordinated for Kirby Smart and Jimbo Fisher, including a national title with Fisher. And yet he's
a coordinator then. That's what he is.
At best, yeah, it's not looking good.
So, well, all right, that's a recap of week 2. We'll be getting this up very quickly, and we will be hitting week 3 here in a couple days to preview what's coming up. Not as many great games on the docket in week 3, but we'll run through it nonetheless. We appreciate everybody listening. Have a great day.